tease Ed a little bit. I was on a detail at the state office and got to know him quite a bit. And I got by with one joke about Polacks. It seems like this old Polak farmer runs into town, goes to the lawyer's office and says, "I want a divorce." The lawyer looked at him and he says, "Well, do you have grounds?" "Well, yeah, I got 280 acres. "No. I mean, do you have a case?" "No, I use a John Deere." "No, what's your grudge?" "I got a carport." How in the world seems to be a problem? Well, the wife went to town, she went shopping, she came home, and she set this little bottle on the table, and it says, "Polish remover." Ed used to tell me he left Chicago because the darned Irishman came in there. And he says, "You're one of the worst." And he said, "You're not from Chicago." I started work in May of 1956, the first week in Moreland. And there was Bert Silcock, Russ Strabs, Bob Springer, Noel Rosetta in the range administration, and there was Bob Berman and myself in S&M, Soil and Moisture. Frank Noel was in Halageeton, and for those who don't know about it, well, that was a weed control program. And there was an operator general, and that's what we called our grader operator, cat operator, Wilbur Gilliland, and district clerk was Verna Luoma. And that was the sum total of it. And then along came, in a little later in the summer, a young lady called Alice Tanaka. And you saw her a little bit earlier. I told Dave that I would tell how I got my nickname. I do have a name that's Jim, that Jane calls me. But all the rest of you, they call me Smokey. At that time, the permanents were on fire call every other weekend. Well, that usually coincided in the off weekend between paydays, so I was kind of forced to stay in town. And I was single, and the temporaries and that would be there, and we'd play cards. If we had any money, we'd drink beer. Anyway, we'd get a fire call, and either Springer or Drabs would come by and get a fire crew, because they were all located there. So they started calling it Smokey the Bear's Den. Well, in August, Jim Medee came on work. Here we was with an office with 6 people and 2 gyms, and so the Smokey the Bear kind of went along with it. And Dave, that's how I got my nickname. Then at that same time, Noel Rosetta, he retired and resigned, went over to the Forest Service. Frank Noel was drafted. Bob Berman, the engineer that had the S&M, went back to the University of Wyoming to be an instructor in the engineering college. So when Alice came on in August, she didn't know that she was replacing 3 men.
That's right.
But in those days when we started, they didn't have a government credit card for vehicles. And Scoop March would say, he was the range and forestry officer in the state director, state office. He'd come up and say, well, he said, we take these new guys and give them a handful of credit cards and head them into the wind. And it was a handful of credit cards. We had a pile that thick from every different gas station you can see. We had Diamond DX, I don't know what all brands, Esso, Carter, everything, BLM cards. So our billfolds were pretty thick. We didn't have any money in it, but we sure had a lot of credit cards. So I don't know when we went to the government single credit card, but when they tell you back in the old days, you give a handful of credit cards and head into the wind, that's the way it was. And every now and then I'll probably say things about as it is now. Well, the now I'm talking to is 1987 when I was retired, because that's about when my knowledge ends. At that time, we had different per dime rates for wage board and permanents, and that may surprise a lot of people. I think it ended in 59 or 60, but I know the operator and I were moving a scraper off the mountain back to the office in the fall. We had to stay overnight because you couldn't travel after dark with an oversized load. And we stayed in a hotel in Graybull, Wyoming, and I got $5 for my overnight per dime, and he only got $3. He got the camp rate, and that was the camp rate back then. In '56, when I started, it was deep into the adjudication of the ranges in Wyoming. And so the S&M crews, we did a lot of the, after they get a range line agreement signed by the different operators, then the S&M people had to go out and hurry up and get a survey, run the fence line, and get a contract to get it built, because that's when we were dividing up the allotments. So we did a lot of that. We had dirt contracts too, that were water spreaders, detention dams, sagebrush spraying, and again, at that time, our main objectives were to increase forage, halt soil erosion, and increase soil moisture. Now, I was a part of the Legacy project in 2002, when a few of the PLF members went around and we reviewed the old projects that we'd done in the 50s and 60s. Did we meet any of these objectives? No, I don't think we increased any forage. Halt soil erosion? No, those water spreader dikes are all washed out. They washed out early in some cases. And increased soil moisture? I don't think we did. And in sagebrush spraying, the two projects that I was personally involved with probably increased the density by 400%. And it's all now at even age stand about this tall instead of different ages. But after Worland, then I went to Lander. Rex Colton was the district manager. There was Keith Miller and Ray Jorgensen in the range division. Gail Elliott was the forester. And there was George Merrifield and myself in S&M. And Roy Leesburg was our operator general. And Jeannie Rogers was the district clerk. I don't know whether anybody here, besides that Dean Bibles, knows a lot of those. But anyway, we had, at that time, we did a lot of trading work back and forth. Gail Elliott would help me a lot on when we were surveying fence lines. And then I'd turn around and help him when we were, he was doing running some lines for timber sale. And probably one of my biggest things, we started out one morning real hale and hearty. We were going to burn some slash early in the spring up on Beaver Creek. and I drove up the big FWD truck. Now that, let's see, that must have been about 1960. Anyway, the year before there'd been a huge fire here in Montana, and I think Russ Penny was the state director then. And with fires in those days, like Scoop March used to say, if you need a battleship, order it and you can get it. Well, Russ had ordered 4 of these great big FWD tankers that would hold about 2,500 gallons each. But after the fire was over, they wouldn't let Montana keep all 4 of those tankers. So Lander got one. Well, we went up to do this slice burning probably in April. And we stopped at Beaver Creek, loaded that 2,500 gallon tank full of water. You know, we had 8 or 9 ton of water. We had a little stringer of trees coming down through there. And I was driving the truck, just fat and happy. We go through that stringer of trees that still had snowbanks in it, and the whole road went out. And so we drained all 2,500 gallons of water out, and we still couldn't move. And so the next day, they left me back in Lander, and the operator general and took the district cat up there and pulled the truck out. So I don't know whether that slash ever got burned or not, but you know, that's one of those things when you go out, and you're sure you're going to do the best job you can, and it just goes poof. Then I went to Rollins, and Riley Foreman, Bob Springer, Ron Harvey, Lowell Dahl, Harold Martin were there. Lowell Dahl and Harold Martin were in the S&M. Al Rubidoux was our operator general, and Maud Ryan and Lottie Murray were the district clerks. Now, Maud Ryan is the mother of Don Ryan, or Little Beaver, and some of you may know him. Somebody else besides Dean Bibles. Yeah. But anyway, that was the second time I worked with Bob Springer. And then finally I worked with Bob Springer just before he retired when I was in the Wyoming State Office. So that son of a gun just couldn't get away from me. In our early days, like I've been talking about, we had S&M and Range, and that was basically what the public domain districts in Wyoming were. We finally got realty specialists in the early 60s. The foresters like Dale Elliott and Vic Pritchard came in the late 50s. I don't think we got wildlifers until the mid-60s. Then, of course, you guys that have those esoteric professions like archaeology and that, why, you didn't come on until after the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969.
76.
Yeah, that's when we got those. Nowadays, I think they use cell phones to talk to each other. We got the first radios in Wyoming in 1958. And they had a big repeater up on, if you know Wyoming, up on Hoodoo Peak, which is just east of the Boysen Dam Reservoir up on the Copper Mountains. And the radio man out of the Denver Service Center would come by periodically when everybody complained about everything, and would come by and get our radios operating again for a while. Another thing that you people that were west of Wyoming and Montana probably haven't heard about if you were, say, come on in the late 60s or 70s, is about the MRB, Missouri River Basin. And in the late 40s, there was a big push nationwide on demonstration areas, and so the Missouri River Basin was chosen. And that's why we have all those great big dams on the Missouri down in North and South Dakota. It was resource development and that. And so we had different surveys for it. Bert Silcock and Rex Zobel told me that they'd worked on MRB surveys, range surveys, back when they were going to college. And they were some of the early ones that came from the MRB to work with BLM. Others that I know of personally were Dick Burr, and some of you will remember that name, and Chad McBurney worked on it, people that come. And I think Harold Tisk, who at one time was an associate here in Montana, was also on it. But one thing about the MRB tours, it was interesting because they had a regional coordinator right here in Billings, but he'd come down and wanted to have tours through the Bighorn Basin. And some of these tours were sponsored by or in connection with the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And so you'd have an international audience. And one of the tours we had in Worland, we had people from Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia, and had their interpreter, and we were showing them the water spreader dikes and the dams and contour furrowing that was being done out there in 15 Mile. Now, I'm not sure whether any of that work ever was done in Eritrea or Ethiopia. Another one, there was two in particular in Lander District that I was interested in. One of them had people from Greece and Israel, or the two countries I really remember. That there may have been others, but anyway, it was a mixed bunch, probably about a dozen people. But one of the people from Greece, when we stopped in a restaurant in Riverton, and we'd already pre-ordered it for everybody, chicken dinner. And he said, "I'm getting tired of chicken," because chicken was the one meat that would be acceptable to all the customs and religions and everything of the group that was with him. And he was getting tired of chicken. Another group was a bunch of sheiks from Tunisia. And it was a small group, only about 6 or 8. And they weren't interested in the water spreader dikes and that, but they were interested in the grazing systems. But anyway, they were going to be there over the weekend. So Rex Colton went down to Riverton to the sales barn and got them a lamb. Back up a little bit. Their interpreter was Arab from Detroit, and hired by the State Department. But he wasn't the right kind of Arab so they could really understand each other. So they were having a little bit of problems because Rex went down to Riverton and the sale barn and bought a live lamb. And the interpreter and I went through the restaurant or the grocery store in Lander, and the interpreter was trying to talk with the lead of these Tunisians to see what foods they could buy to go with their meal. Anyway, the meal was they took the lamb. We went up Sinks Canyon out of Lander, and they butchered the lamb in their own fashion. And there was a couple of interesting things. One fellow, he took a straw, like a regular drinking straw, and he kind of made a little slit in the leg of one of the lambs, started puffing in it and then pushing on it till he got the hide loose all the way around. Then they cut a couple of slits in the hind leg on the rear end of it, and then they just peeled that hide off just like you were taking off a sweatshirt over your head. And then after they got the animal butchered and gutted, one of the guys took the intestines and found him a big willow, because there were plenty of willows along there, put it in there, turned them inside out, washed them off in the creek, threw them in the fire, and then it's kind of like him eating snakes when he was working on that. But so those MRB FAO tours were some interesting things for a young fella from Wyoming. Another thing that I put on here, was APW projects. Now, some of you may know about hearing about APW projects, but they caused lots of problems for the Bureau in Illinois. These were accelerated public works, and it was a means to put contracts and people to work. So BLM at that time didn't have any recreation people as much as such in a lot of the districts. But we had engineers, and so I tell you, we built campgrounds and we built campgrounds in practically every district. Somewhere has a campground or two built by APW, because somebody else is paying for it, but we never got it set for operation and maintenance. And I remember. Another thing, when I was kind of making notes on this, was the 50-mile march craze. During 1963, some of the young staffers in the White House, or that worked for Bobby Kennedy, wanted to start marching these 50-mile marches in one day. And it kind of got to be a craze among the young people now. The young runners from today might want to do that too. Now, some of us out there on the range survey got in on it too. Jim Schmeeding, he had two 25-mile trips that we went out and got him. And I only made about 30 miles the time I got stuck over at Barrel Springs. But so we were right in tune though, we were trying. Basically, I was holding this talk of the things that happened before most of your group came to work. Because I think most of you came to work in the 70s or later. And that, so I'm not going on, and I told a few people that I wouldn't say anything embarrassing about them, even though I might know it. And I wasn't going on to say anything like that. Eric asked me if I knew anything about Keith Miller. Well, one time, after we got radios, Keith Miller was down in the Muskrat Basin in Wyoming, and I was up on top of Beaver Rim. Keith said, "I'm stuck down in Muskrat. Can you help me?" I said, "Sure, Keith, I'll be right down." I pulled off the top of Beaver Rim, which runs east and west. The north side is shaded. The north side has snowbanks all winter long. Into the spring, into May, into June. I think it was June. There wasn't any snow on the ground. I bailed off there. And it took me about 3 hours to get out of that bowl. When I got down there to the far end, Keith had used a handyman jack, winch, had pulled himself within 50 feet of the bank by the time I got to him, and he had blisters as big as eggs on his hand. After all of this, we went through Wyoming, Colorado, Oregon, Montana, New Mexico, back to Wyoming, back to D.C., 31 years. We had 3 kids that graduated from high schools in 3 different states. And I got a wife 61 years, and I'm through.